All right. I think now the broadcasting has started. And hi everyone on the line. I can see we already have some attendees that has joined us. Thank you all for joining. We're gonna give maybe a couple of more minutes for more people to join us before we start. And thank you. I can see on the line some people joining us for very late time zone. Thank you for doing that. And I'm sorry for if you had any inconvenience caused by the change in time zone in Europe. I just want to say already now, I will repeat it later when we have more people on the line that will join us. I can see the number increasing. If anybody has any question at any point in time, feel free to put it either in the chat or in the question box. And we will address it as we go, but most likely we will leave some time for questions at the end. But if there's something that we can read and it's relevant to the flow of the presentation, we can already address it throughout it. So feel free to share it right away. And yeah, I can see even more people joining us. And I just wanted to say already that this webinar is jointly hosted by GOGLA and Lighting Global. We have Leo Blythe for Lighting Global, IFC Lighting Global on the line, and he's going to present with us. And we have Susie Windon from GOGLA that is going to talk about the impact side of things. Let's wait a couple of more minutes for more people to join. In the meantime, if anybody's having technical issues, you can put it also in the chat, and I hope that will resolve themselves as we go. All right, I think we can get started. So again, welcome everyone to this webinar that we periodically do every 6 months to introduce the findings from the semi-annual and sales and impact data collection that we do in part as GOGLA, as IFC Lighting Global. I'm Silvia Francioso. I work as data analyst at GOGLA. You can always reach out to me for any further question, even beyond this webinar, regarding the sales data collection. And together with me hosting the webinar, there is Susie Wildon, my colleague at GOGLA, who's in charge of our work on impact, and Leo Blythe from Lighting Global, that IFC Lighting Global, that is gonna introduce the exercise, as the exercise was started by Lighting Global, and we're still doing it in partnership together. Do you want to try, Leo, if your mic is working correctly now, even?
Hello, Sylvia and everyone. Yes, just checking. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. And if anybody cannot, please put it in the chat. And again, feel free to always ask questions already at this point in time. We will address them as we go. So maybe to kick things off, I want to launch a little bit of a poll, 2 polls separate, that give us a little bit of an idea on of who is attending this webinar. So if you may please choose one of the options on this that you can see on the screen. of who you're representing, so we get a sense of who's there. I'm going to leave it open for 1 or 2 minutes for everybody to fill it in. When I can see the numbers stabilizing, I will close it and you will be able to see the results. All right, couple more answers coming in. All right, so I'll close it so that everybody can see the percentage of our participants. I think now you should be able to see it. Do you see it? You see that most of the people attending the webinar is from private sector, followed by others and non-governmental organizations. And all the investors are more or less all the same. Then the second poll that I want to launch, and I think that's going to help, especially Leo, in introducing the exercise, to get a sense on how familiar are you with the sales data collection. If you are very familiar with it, so you can always you always see it, so you already know what the methodology is, so we can skim through probably a little bit more quickly. Or if you are familiar, but there's still something you may not know, or if you're not familiar at all, so then we can take a little bit more time in introducing it to you to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we don't get confused when addressing the numbers. I'm also gonna leave that one open for around 1 minute something for everybody to reply and give us a sense of the audience we are talking to. Because also often we do this type of exercise so frequently, we do it every 6 months to get a Lighting Global, that sometimes we tend to skim through fast certain details, because for us they are so familiar, but it's always good for us to remind ourselves that not everybody is. So okay, I'm gonna close it and show it to you. And you can see that most of the people here, half of them are somewhat familiar, and there is still quite a large percentage of people that are not really familiar. And I want to welcome those, especially because it's always good to broaden up our audience and expand the reach of this specific report. All right, with this insights, I think I can hand over to Leo for him to address a little bit, given the audience that we have in front.
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining, especially those of you from very late time zones. And as Silvia said, this is an activity that we've been carrying out every 6 months, and we look forward to you continuing to take part. Now, just want to check, Silvia, actually, would you mind forward the slide? Thank you. So, as we mentioned, this activity, I just wanted to start by clarifying that this is something that has been underway, as we mentioned, for many years, and was begun by IFC as a service to the companies with quality verified products. We've then expanded this, thanks to GOGLA, for the last for more than 2 years, to include GOGLA member companies as well. And this is the most comprehensive effort to date to capture off-grid sales results. What we mean by off-grid here, this is limited, if you note there, to companies selling solar lanterns and solar home system kits. Included in those kits, if they are sold with a TV or appliance, then they are reported, but this does not include any separate appliances that are sold, nor does it include any device such as a solar mobile phone charger that does not have lighting as a basic function. So the universe that we're focused on here is a segment of the broader off-grid market, and within that plug and play system, it's again a smaller segment. We do this every 6 months, and so as we said, this is the period from January to June in 2018, and you'll see there are some comparisons with a longer time frame, and yet this is not the purpose of this exercise, is not to draw overall trends. That's a much broader activity, as many of you will appreciate, and sales can really move up and down quite significantly within 6 months due to factors that do not represent larger industry trends, but may be related individual or even circumstances within the country's markets, and we'll get into that later. So the data we're looking at here, it is self-reported by individual companies who share this voluntarily with us, and so it can be subject to change, and there could be some inaccuracies here. We do our very best to do a thorough quality check process, and companies, of course, it's in their best interest to share honest figures and to the best of their ability. But do bear that in mind. This is not aiming to be an absolute figure. Thank you. We could move ahead. So one of the key points here is in terminology, and it's just very important for you to understand that the data you're seeing here is only reported by what we are calling manufacturers, and that's not your typical definition. This does not mean the companies own their factories. This means a company with a brand on its product who is facing the consumers with their own, what they are calling their own product. And all of those sales are recorded here. When we have identified themselves as just a distributor of somebody else's brand, then we do not include those sales here, because of course we would then get double counting of the results. I hope that's quite straightforward. The only other two key issues, and that's in order to prevent data confidentiality leaks, we only share data here when 3 separate companies have reported the same data point. And what you'll find here is that there can sometimes be gaps in the data, and that's because of this reason, where there was not sufficient data to protect individual companies. And a key point now, if you look at how the products are categorized, we have segmented the whole market that we're looking at here from just a few hundred milliamps of solar power up to over 100 watts of power. We separate this into the main categories of portable solar lanterns, and then we move into multi-light systems, which many stakeholders have begun to call solar home systems. But the key issue we want to separate out is we don't lump them together, because these really are systems that can only provide light and mobile phone charging. When you're powering a whole home, then those come into above 11 watts systems, and then we split those again into more meaningful segments, just to help you understand you're comparing like with like. And we've also taken the time to tie those levels of approximate levels of power into what's the real value the customers are getting from that. And you'll see that in the third column, whether they get a light only, mobile phone charging, and then we segment the solar home systems to indicate what kind of appliances are powered. And for those of you interested in the wider developmental agenda, you'll know that the Sustainable Development Goal 7 has been created, which recognizes a multi-tier framework for measuring energy access. And so we've noted which product categories deliver which levels of multi-tier framework electric access. And that's very helpful, of course, when governments are setting targets, aiming at tier 1 being a whole house getting access to a minimum amount of lighting and mobile phone charging. And then you move up to tier 2 when a home also not only gets light and mobile phone charging, but also powering a television or fan for, again, a minimum amount of hours. And you'll see a link at the end of this to the reports that go into more details on that. Thank you, and moving ahead. And on the next slide, what we're going into here is that there's been a very thorough exercise we've conducted over the last 6 months, and GOGLA has gone to great pains to really expand, significantly address the evolution of the sector to be led by many PAYG sales. We worked, GOGLA hired Altai consultants, and the World Bank Group worked closely with them to create these guidelines for how we would review the overall sales data. And we consulted many companies, both on one-on-one and in broader consultations. And then we developed this draft methodology together based on the company consultations and seeking broader input. Many of you will have been in those calls. The end result of this is that we have expanded the whole data collection to separate and effectively capture the sales made through pay-as-you-go platforms from those made on a cash basis. And we're using pay-as-you-go here just to distinguish between a product that is paid for over time, not the technical gadget that's inside a product. And so what you'll notice here is that this means we include microfinance institutions, products sold under their efforts, alongside products sold by Descos using mobile money. So it covers both. So as you can see on this next slide, we have segmented the sales, as I mentioned, between those made through pay-as-you-go or through cash, and you see the definition there. What's important to note is how do we get the actual values of revenue that we report here. There are 2 different methods, one for the cash approach and one for the pay-as-you-go. What we do our best is to take into account all of the various factors that lead to a price build-up. So we use the wholesale price, categorized as the free on board price, from the point of manufacture, which companies disclose to us for a 1,000 unit order, just for comparison. And then we multiply that by the price build-up that gets a product from there to market, including transport, freight, insurance, taxes, duties, retail markup. All of that is taken into consideration to get us to the final cash price. And in parallel, on the pay-as-you-go side, it took us a lot of time to get to talk through with companies watching this, and we've come across the concept of this total cost of ownership for pay-as-you-go products, and that represents an average amount of USD payments received from a customer, and we use USD, of course, just for comparison. Payments are received in local currencies, so we get the average amount of cash received from a customer when they repay the product in full and on, just according to the terms and conditions from the company, with no extra economic modeling, financial discount rate taken. It literally is, to the best as everyone's knowledge, how much money will be paid for that product until it's paid off in full. Okay, so I'm sure that may be a bit heavy, and I would encourage you to look through the report where this is explained in more detail, and to use your platforms for those of you who've got access to this data to understand these characteristics, and to always come back to us if there are any questions, as Sylvia said, as we're going along. So again, we still follow this 3-point data rule, as we stressed earlier. It's our critical guidance here. So if you don't see data, it's not necessarily because it's not there, but because it may be not enough to report. Okay, thank you.
Great.
And now I think with that, I'll hand over to Sylvia to give us the main data and to welcome further discussion as we go along.
Perfect. And feel free, Leo, to jump in at any time for further comments. You know this data in and out as much as I do. We've been working on that for the past few months to get analysis and to really understand what this data means. So feel free to jump in anytime. So regarding the participation, one of the things that is important is what Leo was mentioning, differentiating manufacturing distributors. The numbers here, they represent the performance of 67 companies, which is the same number as last round, which is good, because it's always better to have consistent participation to be able to compare numbers, not to have too many companies dropping out, and we always have new companies joining, either as GOGLA members, Lighting Global affiliates. But without further ado, digging into the numbers, here you can see the volumes divided also by product category and divided by cash. And here you can see just cash and PAYG. Later on, I will show you the split between cash and PAYG. So see which one is cash, which one is PAYG. This one shows all together. And here we can still see that some of the portable lantern, the solar lanterns, they still have the largest volumes. They have the lion's share of the total, while the multi-light system, they have more or less 500,000, and everything in this solar home system space still represents few percentages, but as I will show you later, has been dramatically increasing. And you can see here also the changes in time. They all look very promising and positive. Regarding the solar lanterns and multi-light systems, specifically about the multi-light system, you can see there the drop seems quite significant, but we will see later how that was an outlier, while the sales on solar lanterns are more or less stagnating, slightly decreasing on the 1 to 5 to 3 peak. And here you can see what I was pointing at for the 3 to 10. We had an outlier the last round. Of course, these things are possibly spotted only afterwards. Was due to a specific bulk purchase, which makes sales go down this time around, but they're still higher than what we have reported in the previous 2 rounds. So also multi-light system are still seeing quite a stable sales volumes, while more fluctuating is on the smaller ones. And still the solar home system, they seem very small, but as we will see, they contribute quite a bit to the volumes. We can see in this slide that in the second half of 2016, there were less than 200,000 units, and now we are touching almost 400,000 units. So that shows you the dramatic increase. And again, these numbers, they represent the performance of GOGLA and Lighting Global affiliates, which means that they may not reflect the trends of the overall industry, but this gives you at least an idea on where our membership is moving towards, and is clearly selling much more larger systems, also driven by the sales of appliances, definitely. Regarding cash and PAYG, here you can see the split. The cash, they come up almost to 3 million, meaning that the PAYG is around 700,000 of the total. And the smaller category of portable lanterns does not have any PAYG. No products are, because those are usually products that the customer can purchase right away. While on the other ones, there is always a little bit of a share of products sold on PAYG. Which is much more significant for multi-light system and solar home system. As you can see also in the pie chart below, that, for example, 94% of the system from 21 to 49 are sold on PAYG, reported to us sold on PAYG. So this shows you how the PAYG, we cannot compare this with previous rounds, because we didn't know exactly how many volumes were cash and how many were PAYG, but they still represent PAYG represents still quite 20% of the total sales, which is, being an nascent technology, is still quite important. In terms of newly installed capacity, this really shows the impact of the larger systems. This shows you how we have been seeing an increase of 20% each round in the last 3 rounds, which is mainly driven by large systems, which represent quite large percentages of the total, given their larger solar capacity. And again, this is only newly installed capacity. This is just taking the system that we reported as sold, we take the wattage that they have, and this is what we report back to you. and here you can see the trends compared to the previous rounds in terms of absolute number, not in percentages. There's been quite significant already last round, and this round again, we see another 20% increase. Also, as Leo was pointing at, thanks to the PAYG revision, finally we can report the market value of the system, not only for cash that we've always been reporting. That's why here you can see the percentage changes. Well, but also we can do it now for PAYG. Before we were not used to do that because we didn't have a proxy that was capable of representing the market value of such system. But now, thanks to the total cost of ownership developed with the company, we do, and that's what we are using here. Given the fact that they are computed with two different proxies, one that it means that the amount of money is received in one installment, so and the other one is received in more than one installment, given that it's projected to the future, they are not exactly the same, even if they are in the same currency. So we do not encourage, and we didn't do it in the report, you have seen that there, we did not sum these two numbers together. And the reason is because they are computed with two different proxies. And so we think it's more robust not to sum them together to come up with a single number. But in general, yeah, go ahead, Leo.
No, it's okay. Please finish your train of thought if
No,
helpful.
no worries.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And just to further elaborate on that, just to emphasize, so what you're seeing here for the cash is the amount literally was received when that product was sold over the counter, as it were. Whereas, of course, the calculations we mentioned earlier mean that the PAYG sales value, a fraction of that figure was received in cash. The rest is projected to be paid over the lifetime of that product. And so that's one of the key elements of this new way of accounting, as Sylvia's pointing out. So I just wanted to emphasize that because of the nature of PAYG, these do include cash projections, if you like, is a new element to our report, where before we just captured the actual sales currently. And another point that's just worth noticing, of course, that these quite literally, as many of you practitioners will be working on, your sales of cash and PAYG are happening in one of your hands. So you may be doing less cash sales while literally you are doing more PAYG sales. And so it's important now to consider this as a complete ecosystem there, where we don't just view a decrease in cash sales as bad per se, because there are the increases in the PAYG sales. And going back to the previous slides, you know, obviously what we are seeing is this increase in growth in the PAYG attractiveness of products. People want to pay over time. And of course, this is also linked to the actual cost of products. And so it's an interesting element, if you like, that we do have products that are of good quality, which are higher price, but that people are wanting to pay for that over time. That's obviously going to be a big attraction.
Yeah, absolutely. That also in the flexibility of paying over time reflects on the prices themselves and on the market value of the product. So definitely that has to be taken into account when looking at these numbers. And then, of course, like we are starting to see also, it's very difficult to talk about trends when you talk about it on a global level. For all the practitioners on the line and all the investors that they know the market, they know very well that each and every market works in a different way. So it's very important that we do segment it by regional highlights, but also it's important to talk about product categories within the regions. So here you can see this time around South Asia has passed over Sub-Saharan Africa by just 1 point percentage, having 42% of the total, and Sub-Saharan Africa having 41%. And then here you can see that we had some increases, especially in the Asian regions, while we can see some decreases there on East Africa and Central Africa, and West Africa having stagnating sales, more or less, like with a small increase of 3%. to give you more insight on those changes, we prepared these graphs to show you also.
Well, if I may, Sylvia, if I
Yeah.
may just come in, if you
Yeah.
could just, thank you, hop back. And so just to, obviously, we're aware that you're seeing a lot of decreases overall across Africa, and we haven't gone into the details of that. A key observation is that the size of the markets, as you'll see in Africa, a lot of these are significantly larger than those in South Asia, East Asia, Pacific. So the areas we are seeing growth in, that it is a smaller amount of growth relatively. They had a smaller start. What we're seeing more of is in the more established markets in Africa, where many companies are currently going through expansion and increased investment and doing a lot of activities which are typically involved in expanding to make more of the market, that we are seeing these small decreases in real figures because the overall volumes are still relatively low. So it's worth just bearing in mind when you see the percentages. It's good to refer back to the actual volume of products that this is talking about. Very often, and I'll leave that point to later. We do pick it up on slides later. I just didn't want to leave you with that question here. Yes, we do see a lot of red there, but we will explain a little bit more why the companies have reported to us that this is not a sign of a downturn in markets. It's more of a natural cycle, and companies are still very bullish about their sales. Go ahead, please, Sylvia.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And in that sense, this can be seen also in these trends by region. That, for example, Central Africa seemed to be having a big decrease, but that was an outlier in last round in which there were particular high sales. While the market is gonna see still some oscillation because it's a more immature market compared to others, and definitely also this shift to larger systems has maybe impacted the number of sales. You may sell more larger system, but they're more difficult to sell than portable lanterns. And here is also quite plain to see the dip in South Asia that, as we said also in the report, you may have seen it there, is mainly due by India, in which the demonetization has hit, and also some other things, some concurrent factors had impacted the sales, and now they are going back to the volumes we used to see beforehand. While East Asian Pacific is seeing like quite a steady growth. Latin America had a spike last round, while Middle East the other way around had a quite low last round. So Leo, do you have any other points on this slide? But in terms of in general, definitely none of the markets has seen like huge decreases or specific problems that we have outlined. One of the things that we have seen in this 6 months, we haven't had too many macroeconomic factors to report upon at a global level. It was quite more a diverse picture that we tried to depict in the market dynamics of the report that I encourage you to go and read, specifically pointing at situations in country that may explain the sales volumes.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, I think you covered it well. I would just add, sometimes many of you have individual questions to ask you to explain just a little bit more general perspective. And so one point here I'd mention is, quite frankly, when we see MENA, Middle East and North Africa, I'd just like to mention that a little bit more about some of those regions just quickly. And so I think we're all very familiar with Sub-Saharan Africa, West, East, Central Africa. In Southern Africa, again, really that is just a relatively small portion of the markets that we see companies working in those countries where they have higher electrification overall. And this has not been a big push for companies that we've been working with. So that's why we see overall small factors there. East Asia Pacific, as we were saying, generally these are very individually small markets, which have been very challenging for companies to work within. And again, there's just a trade-off between opening any market takes the same, similar amounts of effort, and so big companies are going to where they do have larger potential markets, and the lack of a enabling environment. Obviously, there's a strong ecosystem of donors and grant support and actual investors all willing, altogether crowding in interest in Africa, for example, and some in Asia. We don't see those kind of attractions to a lot of these markets in East Asia, Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean. And in MENA, really, we sadly see a lot of these sales are due to relief efforts and bulk purchases because of these consistent crises we've had since the Arab Spring some time ago. And so that's like, these are again not growth of commercial markets that we are seeing there. These are great uses of excellent technology to really help people in very challenging times. And then of course Europe and Central Asia, North America are largely sales as a pathway to other markets, and we just include that there. Thank you. I think you covered the main markets well, Sylvia.
Perfect. So also here, I'm not gonna focus too much on each and every slide, but it's more like to give you. I will also share this deck afterwards. But here's just to give you an idea on how much of the total sales that we are reporting upon in each region is given by cash, and how many is given by PAYG. And here, of course, is plain to see the main difference between the West Africa and East Africa compared to, for example, South Asia and Central Africa, that are more the last two are more cash dominated, while the first two, they are seeing this penetration of PAYG be quite significant. And the other ones, when you see, for example, talking about the 3 data point rule, for example, Middle East and North Africa, you can see the total is the same as cash. This means that there was no PAYG, while, for example, in Europe and Central Asia, the split is not shown because of a confidentiality issue. This just gives you an idea also for the companies on the line when reading their report, because each participating company gets their own market share report where they can see their sales against the affiliates and aggregate sales that we're presenting here, and they can compare them. And sometimes, of course, they may not see a comparison in a specific segment because of a 3 data point control issue. And yeah, this shows you simply what I was saying, that still South Asia is mainly cash sale dominated, while pay-as-you-go is still thriving in East Africa while it was started. Here also, just I'm gonna briefly show you these slides. I'm not gonna go through all the numbers, but this shows you what's the picture in East Africa. Also, what we were saying before about the sales overall decreasing. This is mainly due to specific segments decreasing, while other ones are still increasing. And here you can also see the split in cash and PAYG be more predominant, of course, for the multi-light system and solar home systems. While for the smaller lantern, they are still mainly sold on a cash basis over the counter. And the picture is slightly different for West Africa. And again, here, when you see 340% increase, as what Leo pointed out before, the volumes for 11 to 20, they're still only 14,000 units. So when you see such a large increase in percentage, it will still remind you to look at the fact that it's still relatively small in terms of absolute sales. The only here that seems to be slightly decreasing is the small portable lanterns, while all the other ones are either increasing or seeing a stagnation compared to the last round. And also at the end of every year, we tend to make a comparison looking at the full year, which removes some of these fluctuations that Leo was also mentioning in the beginning. When we look at 6 months into 6 months, it's normal to see a higher fluctuation. Then going even deeper, we do collect sales on a country basis, and for the first time, of course, given the fact that we can segment sales, we can give you a top 10 for PAYG and a top 10 for cash. So, for example, the total for Kenya will be given by the sum of the PAYG and the cash, just so that to put it in perspective. And as you can see, the first 5 countries are more or less the same, but kind of shuffled around, having Kenya and Uganda having much more PAYG sales than, for example, cash sales, while India, of course, given what we've seen before, the technology there and the pay-as-you-go model has seen less expansion to date. While so the first 5 are more or less the same country shuffled around, while the second half looks quite different between the two, and is given because of the different type of products sold. We just have, again, Myanmar present in both, while we have countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Zambia on the PAYG side that don't appear on the cash side. And also, again, the length of installed megawatts here gives you an idea on the size of the products that we are talking about. And for example, are quite, you know, like you can see that India is 2.98, while Kenya is very small, 0.33 on cash, while on megawatts in terms of PAYG products on the second to last column on your right, you can see it's 3.6. This shows you on how the small systems are still sold on cash, while the larger system are mostly sold on PAYG. That's why we see larger volumes on the right hand side, even if the volumes are much smaller than on the left hand side. Also, for another example, can be Nigeria, where we can see 2.5, 2.6 almost megawatts installed with smaller volumes than Kenya. So this shows you how much larger systems are sold in that specific geography, for example. And also you can see the percentage share gives you the share on the total for that category. So India alone is 44% of all the cash sales that we report upon, for example, while Kenya is 30% alone on the PAYG side. And on this also, we did the same exercises for the others. We try to put things in perspective. We try to show it on an evolution basis. And here you can see, again, the dip I was talking about in the beginning on India, while all the other countries, for example, Malawi, in December 2017, entered the top 10 countries. While that we can see clearly now there was an outlier compared to the sales before, while Cameroon was quite small last round, is again comparable to the previous round this time round. We can see this changing over time, and we always have to put it in perspective on a 6 months basis. We can also see how we are reporting growing volumes on Bangladesh. We are increasingly expanding our member base in South Asia, thanks to as GOGLA, thanks to our local representative in India, but also mainly there, it's the sales that we are reporting upon are still due to government tenders and to the refugee crisis that started happening in the end of 2017, more prominently. So some of the systems sold are, again, as pointed out before about MENA, to alleviate specific situation in countries where the refugee crisis is happening. And also in Congo, here is visible to see that we had an outlier in the last reporting round with quite large purchase. And I don't know if, Leo, you have any more insights on the country. I invite you to read specifically the market dynamics section, where we put this graph and we highlighted specific intervention that we have seen happening in the last in the 6 months of reporting that we are showing here.
Thank you. No, I think you've got that well covered.
So again, briefly, India here shows you how small the PAYG is and how big the cash is. And one of the things that we are seeing, though, is that we are again able to report on larger products. So the 11 to 20 watt peak as pass-through data point rule, which gives an indication also that companies also in India are shifting and selling also larger products, in many more companies entering the market. We invite you here, there is a link, you can visit it. It's probably the page where you have downloaded the report, but if you haven't passed through that page, I invite you to do so. You can look at the map of the world and see the sales per country and filter it out if PAYG or cash, and it's going to show you also visually, you can see the bubbles, the size of the bubbles is going to show you which countries are bigger than others. And we plotted it against the access to electricity in terms of percentage of population. So this also gives you an indication on how many people have to be addressed in each country with the system that we are talking about. And I will again welcome all the questions to be made on the chat box. I see that there is a couple. I will address them. If we don't have time to address them here, I will address them privately. But definitely, I will pass and hand over now to Susie Wilden to talk about the impact data, because we do use all the sales data mainly for our advocacy at GOGLA, and we do so by translating them into more actionable impact to nuance our conversation with policymakers. But I'll let Susie introduce that with even more words. Just tell me, Susie, when to skim to the next slide.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and please do skip on, Sylvia. Just a couple of slides here on the sort of high-level impact estimates that we're seeing. And just before I jump into the data that you're seeing on the screen, just a couple of quick points to mention before digging in. You obviously heard Leo speaking about the pay-as-you-go revision and the updates to the database in that regard, but we also did a very full update to the database as it relates to the impact metrics, and in part, obviously, being able to split now between the sales for cash and PAYG to better show these impact estimates coming out of the system at the end. And we've also split all of the impact metrics that drive these numbers here by the different system sizes that Sylvia has been describing as we've gone through the presentation. So there was a big revision to the database that also took into account the challenge that we've been having in picking up some of the previous sales data that had been shared with us. And so the numbers that you're seeing, if you've been paying attention to previous reports, well, if you paid attention to the last report, we didn't actually share too much impact data, knowing that this revision was coming up. But to reports before, you might see a bit of a jump in some of the numbers between those reports and this report. And that is because we've been able to better pick up those previous sales and those sales of products that were changing within the system. And so those figures, there isn't a massive, just sudden increase in impact. It's much more gradual than it seems, but these are now more accurate in terms of the figures that we're being able to share. And just a quick reminder, obviously back from what Leo mentioned at the beginning, all of these numbers only come from those GOGLA members and IFC associates who participated in the data collection. So it's not the full off-grid solar market, but a massive chunk of it, but not all of it. And they're all estimated numbers that are driven from those metrics and the sales that we're seeing. So just a quick reminder on that. But of course, as we see, there is now nearly 215 million people who have been living in homes with improved energy access. And the difference there between the people who've ever lived in a household and the 103.5 million who are currently living in a household is related to the lifetime of the products that we feel robustly able to suggest is how long those products will last. Of course, they've got battery lifetimes, and so they don't last in perpetuity. I'm certain that some of those the products that might not be captured in this current are still operational, but we have quite a strict and conservative way of measuring current impact, hence the slight difference between those numbers there, or the significant difference between those two numbers there. But these are obviously really big figures of now the number of people who have been had a household that's been improved by energy access or are currently benefiting from solar lanterns and solar home systems. And we assume that many of those who might not perhaps be buying products from GOGLA members and affiliates might be buying products from others. Perhaps the grid has come to them, or perhaps even mini grids have come to those regions that also might explain some of the difference between those. We've also seen a really big jump in the number of people who are achieving or being able to get services at this tier 1 and tier 2 of energy access. And this is using the SE for All multi-tier framework to establish the level of energy service that those households are getting. And tier 1 is where you have basic lighting and phone charging, and tier 2 is where your household, or the amount of power that's going into your household, is supporting slightly more services. So looking really at being able to support a certain level of appliances, 4 hours of television, etc. So that's the difference between the tier 1 and tier 2. And we're seeing, as you see, these really big numbers of people who are being able to access those levels of energy access. Two things that we've been able to do in this impact section of the sales and impact report we've not been able to do in previous years is to add in a few more metrics around economic activity. And so on the right-hand side, you see this now 4.5 million people we estimate are currently able to undertake more economic activity when they've got an off-grid solar product in their home. And this has been driven by a large revision to the impact metrics, and that has been driven by by new data that's come in that's been able to highlight some of this activity that is happening. And this is a very broad overview, economic activity, that incorporates people who are able to spend more time at work, perhaps because they have more light in the evening, extending the time of their day, or they don't have to spend time traveling to buy energy or to charge their phones. Also people who are using the systems within an enterprise or an income generating activity, so opening a store later at night, or using their system to and a television with it to power a video hall, charging phones for a fee, those kind of activities. And we also have seen from research that actually a number of households report that a member of that household has been able to get a new job and to take on a new role because of the additional time that's been made available to them. So that's a very broad catch-all, this 4.5 million. And just below it, you'll see one of those aspects I just described, where we have the 2.5 million people who are using those systems to support enterprise. As I mentioned, that sort of lighting a stall at night, charging phones for a fee, being able to power televisions and video halls, having the lighting used in agriculture and other activities. If you can switch to the next slide, please, Sylvia. What we'll see on this next slide is another breakdown of the economic activity, 2.4 million people who are spending more time working, and the report that someone in their household has been able to do that. And for those of you who are paying attention, 2.4 and 2.5 add up to 4.9, not the 4.5 for economic activities overall that we saw before. And the reason for that is because you find that sometimes people are doing more than one of these activities. They might be spending more time at work, but they might also be using their system to support an income generating activity. And so they sort of work together, but they also are slightly separated as well, and hence the reason for having that catch-all at the top. And this economic activity has allowed a significant chunk of those doing more work to create more income because of it. And overall, if we look at that rise in income estimated across the lifetime of those products, we're seeing that number estimated as around $3.5 billion that has been or will be unlocked by these systems, by people being able to use them to support those economic activities or to get more time in their day from additional light hours. This switch from off-grid solar to off-grid solar from other solutions has also meant that we have now, or currently are meaning that 2.8 million kerosene lanterns don't have to be used by households. And that has this increased access to off-grid solar, improved quality of light, improved quantity of light overall. And obviously this is a massive number, but it's nearly allowed us to reach an extra 50 billion hours, which of course, as you've seen before, or just a moment ago, is unlocking opportunities for people to undertake economic activities. We know that that is opened up to additional study time for children, more time for families to enjoy their time together, etc. Eradicating kerosene lanterns or eradicating the use or partial use of kerosene lanterns has also enabled the off-grid sector to avoid around 51 million metric tons of CO2e. Just a quick note on that E, that is not just CO2, but it's also equivalent CO2, and that is driven by black carbon or soot that comes out of the system of kerosene lanterns, and that actually creates quite a lot more warming than CO2 does, and so that's a huge chunk of it. Also not in these metrics, but of course that's the pollution that creates particulate matter that's also quite dangerous for health in households as well, but a significant amount of CO2e that's being avoided by a switch to off-grid solar. And lastly, on these slides, the switch to off-grid solar from other traditional energy sources has allowed an estimated 8.4 billion in savings for those off-grid households. And we've looked really at that of the switch from the solar lanterns and the multi-light systems, hence the under 11 more power, because once you get over that amount, you're actually incorporating many of the products now also have televisions with them and additional appliances and services. So the like-for-like comparison with previous energy expenditure is not as easy to compute. So so that actually 8.4 billion is related to those smaller products and those switches there. Last slide, Sylvia. I won't go into this in detail. I know Sylvia said she'd share it round. It's really in there to showcase that we have now done, as I mentioned at the beginning, even more work to split the impact metrics by the different system sizes and to look at the amount of impact that's being generated by those different system sizes across these different metrics and indicators. So I'll leave you to have a look at that yourselves. But the one thing to mention here as well, and I think that Leo and Sylvia have been mentioning this throughout, is that obviously you might see a smaller amount of impact from larger systems and more from smaller, and that's not related to the actual impact that's created by those systems, but very much linked to the number of sales of those different systems. So just a quick note as you look at this, not to think that the smaller products have the biggest impact and the larger ones don't have much at all. It's very much a mixture, and all of the products have a fantastic amount of impact, some more than others in different areas. But have a look at that, and please do, everyone reach out to me if you have questions on the metrics or the numbers. I'll hand back over to Sylvia because I know we're knocking up to time and there's a few questions as well. Sylvia, you just quickly, I think you might be on mute, or it could just be myself.
Yeah, I was on mute. Thank you. I was saying thank you, Susie, for the explanation on the impact side. Here you can find also, I will share around the slides, as I said. You can find the Impact Hub that will take you to a place where you can actually see a white paper explaining all of these metrics in details. So you can get probably answer to most of your question there. And also, again, the online platform, and for the companies that have access to it on data.gogla.org, they have access to their market share report. Feel free to reach out to me for any questions. In that sense, we have a couple of questions. One of them, I think we can start with that, Susie, and it's for you. And it's Adolf from Total saying that you would like to understand a little bit better the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2. For you to just mention briefly this, you can also take this conversation offline later on, but to maybe point Adolf to what's the difference and maybe where you can find more information on this.
Yeah, absolutely, Adolf. I'm very happy to follow up with you with some the actual multi-tier framework that SE for All has created. But essentially, this looks at the energy service that's provided to a household. And Tier 1, at that level of energy service, you would be receiving a certain amount of time of light within a day, and you would be receiving the opportunity to charge a mobile phone and have that charged. When you move up to Tier 2, you would be having the opportunity to power some different appliances and be able to run a television for 4 hours. Into Tier 3, you have an opportunity to power a larger amount of appliances. Into Tier 4, you have more hours of light and energy, and into Tier 5, probably the energy that we're lucky enough to receive, the full energy service at all hours of the day. And this framework has been created so it's easier to compare and contrast off-grid, mini-grid, and on-grid services or technologies by the service that they can actually offer. You might have some grid solutions that are very intermittent, and therefore you wouldn't be having 24/7 energy access, and that would mean that perhaps you have grid, but you only have Tier 2 or even perhaps Tier 3 or even perhaps Tier 2 energy access. So it is looking at the services and the amount of energy a household can receive to be able to create a level playing field for those different technologies in terms of comparing them and looking at their progress and support for households. So I can share more on that offline happily, but that's a quick overview.
Perfect. Thank you, Susie. And then I think this one can be maybe addressed by Leo and me together from Muhammad. And he says that he finds interesting that there is a longer chunk of smaller SHS from 21 to 49 on PAYG compared to 50 and 100. And he's asking if we have any insights on what that might be due to. Do you want to start, Leo?
Hi there, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that the key point to come back to here is if you actually look at the volumes of sales, and that these are relatively small, and so it's best to look at the broader trends, which we had percentage-wise earlier, showing the high percentage of pay-as-you-go in both categories overall. And what you'll find is that all of these sales include sales through tenders or for bulk purchases. And the good news is that there are a growing amount of government-supported energy access being provided, and these do involve tenders for various sizes of systems and various clever mechanisms that aren't just that are just incentives. So what I'm saying are that the role of incentives supporting the sector is significant. We have incentives for tens of thousands of a particular size product, and that is something that just always happens. And it may again go more towards cash rather than pay as you go. So it's those kind of nuances that are often behind. And I'm not actually addressing your specific question there. It's just a general case that can lead to these kind of circumstances. I think it's very helpful to keep that framework in mind.
Yes, yes, indeed. I think that's very important. And if I may add on that, is that also there are some systems, there are quite large systems that are purchased by customers that may live on a weak grid, which are not necessarily people that cannot afford a system. So they may want to purchase it in one installment. So there's companies offering this service. So here we are covering naturally more off-grid customer, but also weak grid customer, which may have a higher purchasing power, so they may not be buying this on a pay-go basis. I think this was the last question. If there's any more question, always feel free to reach either the info email at GOGLA, or you can find my email or Susie email on the website, or also Leo. Like, feel free to reach to us for any further question. We are gonna upload this recording online on our YouTube channel at GOGLA, so that if you want to share with anyone else, feel free to do so. And in the meantime, I think we can close it here. So thank you all for attending. I'll be in touch with the slides, and if you're gonna see also there's a small survey in the end if you may want to reply.
Thanks so much to everyone, and to yourself as well, Sylvia and Leo, for presenting. Really exciting to see all the figures.